Hi everybody, it is Dr. Z. Here we are in chapter 27. We talked about Stalinism and communism in the Soviet Union in the earlier parts of this video series for chapter 27. The next parts we are going to be talking about fascism, and we are going to start with fascism in Italy because that is where it began. So, the first question, of course, is why? Why does a democratic state move towards fascism? So it has roots, we learned from our key concept outline, right, in the pre-World War I era. But it gains popularity because of post-World War I bitterness, the rise of communism, uncertain transitions to democracy, or a disbelief in democracy itself, right, and economic instability. So there's sort of a recipe for fascism in that way, in the sense that it's not one thing that brought it about. A lot of things about fascism is a definition of what it's not, right? It is not liberal parliamentarianism. In fact, it defines itself against it and discredits those values. It also is not on the left. It is on the far right, right? So it is a way to mobilize and politicize and gather anger and tensions in the masses on the far right. It also uses the language that's similar to the left, right, in the sense of socialism and social values, and in the sense that it's totalitarian, right? It echoes communism in that way. But it is definitely not. It is a far-right nationalist, very militarily kind of ideology. And it's sort of, if you want to take 19th century nationalism and put it on steroids, right? And you get fascism. So we see it as ultra-nationalist. Some people call it hyper-nationalist. And it believed in the use of force. Violence is okay to solve problems. So when we think about these sort of a spectrum of political ideologies, I found this graphic to be fairly useful, right? Communism on the far left, fascism on the far right, right? And then we have lots of other ideologies that fall in between. So while the experience of the everyday people under them echoed each other in the sense that they were both totalitarian, both socialist, right? They are politically opposed to each other. So a lot of people say that, or at least people used to say that Italy had a defective history, right? Germany had a defective history. Weimar's democracy failed. Italy's 19th century democracy failed, right? It never really unified. The Risorgimento was not a success. It didn't make Italians, blah, blah, blah. But when we look at things, we actually really need to think about the economy, right? When we are contemplating this question. So here we have the regional capita, the GDP in 1891, right? Dark is good, right? So darker colors are good, right? And by 1911, we see that the per capita income was much lower, right? We see lots more lighter colors in the map there, right? And so there's an economic argument that certainly can be made. There's also a political argument that in the 1920s, authoritarianism was everywhere, right? So there are places that are democratic and there are places that are authoritarian in light gray, right? But there also are places that have both. And there are fascist parties that arise in England, for example, right? And so these sort of authoritarian ideas were seen as an alternative to liberal parliamentarianism at the time. Like with communism, there's always sort of a recipe, right? There's a political aspects, there's economic aspects, there's ideological aspects, there's military aspects, right? That sort of all lead into this right-wing fascist ideology. I liked this graphic quite a bit. I thought it was pretty helpful in thinking about all of the factors that come in when we think about the why. Okay. For example, deadlock in parliamentarian aspects, right? A lot of, economic problems with recession and certainly with strikes and disorder, right? And then people feeling victimized or humiliated after the war, right? As we're going to see, fascism in Italy emerges led by veterans coming out of World War One. And then sympathy, right, with the fascists and collusion with them, in the sense of we want law and order, right, and control. So these, all of these things sort of come together. And like I said, it can be an ideology that is defined as what it's against peace. Peace is impossible, right, is a basic tenet of fascism. Democracy is slow and ineffectual. Communism is the enemy, right? And individualism makes absolutely no sense, right? Fascists will suppress the individual, right, for the greater good. However, what are they for? Veterans, right? Veterans are very important in fascism. Agriculture, farming, very important. The state, very important, especially over the individual, right? And the historic legacy of the Roman Empire, right? Something to aspire to, according to Italian fascists. And the word itself, fascist, comes from a Roman word, right? Meaning bundles of sticks. And if you look at these images, right, this is the symbol, the fascist littorio, okay, the fascio, and it is a Roman symbol, right? And it is a bundle of sticks tied together with twine with an axe in the middle of it, right? And you've probably walked in the woods, and if you take one dead stick and you try to break it over your knee, you can break it very easily. But if you take 10 of them and hold them together, you can't break them. There's strength in numbers, right? And that's what this metaphor means. All right, so that is an introduction to fascism. We are going to talk more about how Mussolini came into power in our next video. Thank you.